Midge Ure, welcome back to Australian Musician.
Oh, thank you very much. Nice to be back again.
So, how are you feeling in isolation?
I'm feeling all right. I mean, I was speaking to a musician friend of mine, a guy called Ty Unwin, who orchestrated my orchestrated album.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anyone who spends more time in his studio. And I asked him how isolation was, and he said nothing's changed.
Yeah.
He's still in with all these toys. So I'm one of the fortunate ones, I suppose, that I've got my little studio here, and I
Yeah.
carry on working no matter what. So.
Yeah. And how's your local area going in regard to cases and the hospital? They're all coping, or?
Well, I'm down in the southwest of England, and there seems to be, whether it's some kind of middle class area or whatever, but it seems to be less cases down this neck of the woods. So we've had it reasonably light compared to others. So, but we've had a death in the village, which brings it really close to home because it's a very small village we live in. But yeah, I think coping is an understatement or an overstatement actually. It's very, very difficult for the National Health Service to
Yeah.
do this, to sustain what they're trying to do with the amount of cuts that have gone on there over the last 10 years. It's been hacked away at, and now we're expecting them to work miracles with nothing. So everyone's doing their best to try and generate some income for them to keep it going.
Yeah. And are you making an effort? You're getting dressed each day?
Come on, look at this. I think with the fact that my entire year, like everyone's, has been decimated. Every festival, every concert that was planned has gone. I'm now. I think by the end of the year, with my track record of having written one of the biggest Christmas songs ever, I'm now going for the Father Christmas job. Just keep this going. Yeah.
Yeah. You've been doing some cooking. I know you've appeared on a couple of TV cooking shows.
Oh, I yes. Well, I've got three of my daughters are isolating at home with us. So it's very odd because they've all been away, at university and living on their own and doing whatever. And to have them all back again, five adults in the house. Yes, someone's got to do the cooking. Although one of my daughters is pretty good at it. She has she's got a good hand in there. But yeah, there's been an awful lot of fighting over who's getting what, and it doesn't help that you've got one's a vegan and one's a vegetarian and one doesn't eat this and one doesn't eat that, and it's like, oh, for God's sake. But it's a good test of character. It's a good test of your parental skills.
Yeah. And you've been keeping an eye on what other artists are doing online? Have you been watching some live streams?
I've seen a few things. I think the one that impressed me most. I mean, everyone's doing this the Zoom thing, where it seems, for whatever reason, that you can actually collaborate with people in real time. And I've watched Elbow doing a few of their, at home concert broadcasts. And it's brilliant. I mean, to see, four people in four different parts of the country all coming together and all playing with their headphones on and playing in sync with each other is just outstanding. So I think it's kind of opened up and maybe changed our perspective on how we will all record and work in the future. The technology is available. It's there now. I was speaking to another musician friend of mine the other day who was in the middle of recording a string quartet, but obviously the players were all in different rooms, and he was recording them and kind of conducting them and getting them each individually to record through their own system, so they had a high quality recording of each part. But he was conducting the entire thing, making sure that all the parts all gelled together as a unit. Then they would send the individual parts to him, and he would put them into Logic or Pro Tools or whatever he was using, and work that way. So I think where there's a will, there's a way. So it has changed how I know many businesses. I'm part of a little entrepreneurial group here down in the West Country, in the Bath area, and they're all businessmen, and they're all talking about how this is now changing their outlook on how they will conduct their businesses. So rather than sticking someone on a plane to go to, Melbourne to go and have an interview or go and have a meeting, they can actually do this stuff in real time, just thinking about it in a logistical, sense, really.
Yeah. The reason I wanted to catch up with you was basically to relive the New Zealand Australian tour, because it was a tour like no other, really. I'm sure you have stories from Ultravox tours in the past, but this one was very different. Last time we caught up face to face was at NAMM in California. The musical industry, or the music products industry, was in fine form, wheeling and dealing and making a lot of noise in the convention centre. Was coronavirus even on the radar for you at that time? You were touring there.
I don't think it was. I don't think it had raised its head, and I don't think there were any worries about it. When I saw you last, it was January, February, something like that. I can't remember exactly. I was doing a one-man tour across America. I mean, it wasn't meant to be one man, but it turned out to be a one-man tour. And it wasn't on the horizon at all. I had bigger fish to fry, I thought. And that was just logistically getting from A to B on my own, driving from, Los Angeles and dropping the car off at JFK, a month later. So I was full of that at the time, just trying to get the tour done because I'd been let down at the last minute. And it wasn't until I got home and we started up with the band Electronica for the 1980 tour, continuing the 1980 tour in the UK, that we started hearing a bit about this. But again, by the time we got to New Zealand, the word was out that something was going on, but nobody was sure. It was such a there were no parameters. It was such a grey area. So it was just this thing that just hung in the air, and nobody had any parameters within which to work. But rapidly, over the New Zealand tour, we noticed that it was kind of like having a tsunami on your tail. Things started to change and parameters started coming in, governmental parameters. Because I think the New Zealand government were on it incredibly quickly. So they were the first place to start limiting crowd sizes, to start talking about, washing hands and taking care of yourself and how this, because they were trying to uncover how this virus was spreading. And it didn't really affect the touring aspects too much. We were a kind of self-contained unit. There were 10 or 12 of us travelling together. It didn't seem to. We didn't see the demon that was about to come, because no one did. So we just got on with our daily jobs. Of course, by the time we left New Zealand, the parameters had been pretty well put in place. And by the time we got to Australia, New Zealand kind of closed its doors. And we realised that there was something serious going on at that point.
Yeah. So you got to Australia, and Brisbane was the first gig. And in Australia at that stage, it was still business as usual, although people were talking about it. How did that first gig go down?
Oh, incredibly well. Weirdly, ironically, I mean, you know that I've spoken to you many times about this, that, for whatever reason, I hadn't been to Australia and New Zealand for like a 25-year period. And I decided to, 6-7 years ago, to come back and start trying to build up, a following and reestablish me playing live there. And this tour, of all tours, was the one that did that. I brought over the entire band Electronica, I brought over the crew, we did it properly, we did it well, and it was received incredibly well. So the shows were great, but with this sword dangling over our heads, not knowing, as you went from show to show and city to city, not knowing whether that show was going to happen that night or not, because it's a bit like, playing Monopoly, but someone's changing the rules every day. So you had no idea what you were stepping into. So ironically, this was the best tour of Australia and New Zealand that I had done since the solo days back in the mid 80s.
Yeah, it was pretty much a sold out tour this time around.
It was, and the really sad part is that I think people have and it's an understandable misconception. People have the misconception that the artist is absolutely responsible for every venue you play at. So lots of people were getting in touch, saying to me direct, saying, I've decided I'm not coming on Friday. Will I get my money back? And I'm saying, well, I'm trying to answer all these things, saying, well, I'm not the promoter. This is how it works. With the best will in the world, I don't sit with a map and a pen and go, I want to play there and there and there and there. A promoter has to approach you. He has to go to the venues. He has to sell the show onto a venue, blah, blah, blah. And then I had to try and explain that if you bought tickets for the cinema and decided not to go for whatever reason, the cinema wouldn't give you money back. So the promoter probably wouldn't give you money back. So at that point, it was still a choice for people to come or not. But equally so, I mean, that was the minority. The majority of people who decided not to go to the shows, even though they bought a couple of tickets and were looking forward to it, totally understood that it wasn't a command. It wasn't a law that you couldn't mix with other people. It was a personal choice at that point. And it was very, very vague. I mean, all the way through the tour, it was very vague as to whether this was going to be absolute, you cannot mix with people, or there was no isolation, self-isolating going on at the time. It was people, I think the governments were trying to figure out how best to deal with this. And they were slowly but surely coming to the conclusion that trying to keep some form of isolation apart was the right thing to do. But again, there were mixed messages.
Yeah.
There was, Scotty from marketing had been saying one thing to the public, but doing something completely separate with his own church events, 10,000 people or whatever, all standing side by side, and that was giving mixed messages to people. So people were running scared, as we were, because we had no rules. It was just this ever morphing thing.
Yeah. So, what were you basing your decisions on? Were you watching just the TV news? Was the promoter advising you?
I did all of that. We were hand in hand with the proper promoters this time, which was fantastic. And we made decisions on a daily basis as to whether the show was going ahead. Weirdly, as the shows got further into the tour, like the Sydney show, for example, only 2/3 of the audience turned up, but it was a sold-out show. And that was giving us big indications that it was maybe time to call it a day. But we were taking the governmental advice, we were taking advice from the promoters and the venues, because no one wanted to put themselves in any form of danger, of course. But the majority of people still wanted to come along and see the shows. So up until the point where things closed down so rapidly, I think we were the last act to play in most of the venues we played at, because most of them were being furloughed or closed or shut down. So the entire staff of these venues had no idea what they were doing next week or next year or whatever. So I think we were like the last band standing in a way.
Well, you arrived in Melbourne, and Friday the 13th of all dates
yes,
was the day that the shit really hit the fan, and we were told that on the Monday that there were going to be crowd limits and there was going to be social isolation, that sort of thing. It was the Forum in Melbourne. How was that show for you?
It was great. All the shows were fantastic. Musically, emotionally, it was great to see people for 2 hours. Take their mind off what was going on outside. And I think possibly there was an element of thinking this might be the last live event that they could go to for the foreseeable future. And they were making the most of that. It just seemed, on a musical level, it was great. On a human level, it was fantastic. But on a safety level, I have no idea. I can only look back at it in hindsight and think, were the right decisions being made, not just by the band and the promoters and the venues, but by the public.
Yeah.
You know, would it have made any difference for the third of the audience who didn't come if they had come and seen the concert and enjoyed themselves for a night? Or would it have made any difference if we just pulled the plug on it and gone home with our tail between our legs? It's something that we've got to kind of try and figure out as we go along on this. As we're getting to what hopefully is the peak of the fatalities here in the UK, it's a strange thing to think that, you know, a month ago I was kind of sitting where you are, about to step on stage or performing on stage at this time.
Yeah, I didn't get to go to the Melbourne show either because of the enormity of that day. I was very busy, and my wife's in the health system, so she had a busy day too. But New Order was supposed to play on the Sunday night at the same venue,
Yeah.
and they cancelled. So you were the last act in that venue. What did you think of the Forum? Did you enjoy the architecture there?
I loved it. It was someone took a photograph from the audience and during Vienna, and they said that the theatre was built for you.
Yeah.
It's so OTT and beautiful. I loved it. I mean, it's obviously been an old cinema or something in its day, very Hollywood, but outstanding. And we were the last band to play there because I had a chat with the staff at the end of the evening. And they were saying that that's it. They were going home to twiddle their thumbs and lock the doors and, you know, eat themselves into stupor.
Yeah. A couple of friends who did go were very impressed by your guitar sound. What was the setup for that tour with your guitar?
Well, it was a silent stage. That was what we were trying to achieve. And I started doing the dates with my Hughes and Kettner little 30-watt amp head, which you can get a really good DI sound out of. They really worked hard on the DIs so that everything we were hearing on stage was through in-ears. If Bernice at the front of house had pulled the faders down, all you would have heard was wood hitting plastic rubber cymbals. You know, we were using a Roland D50 drum kit or the equivalent that we could get in Australia to rent. Everything else was DI. But I wasn't happy with the guitar sound. The guitar sounded great coming out the PA, but through the in-ears, it sounded fizzy and horrible. Oh. And it's the most distracting thing. If you're playing your heart out and you're just hearing something that sounds like a bee in your head, it's horrible. So I ended up buying a little, tiny little, in fact, I've got one here. I'll show you. This is the very beast that I used. It's a little Vox 50-watt amplifier. That is a complete 50-watt amp. And I rented in 2x12s or 4x12s, depending on what happened up. It's called a Vox MV50. And it is the best sounding thing ever. So I ended up having a guitar amp, this and a cabinet at the side of the stage or behind the stage, mic'd up so that I was hearing something that sounded good to me. So it was that. And a blues overdrive pedal, a blues driver, and the vintage lemon drop guitar, the 400-pound guitar that I've been using for the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. So after Melbourne, it was Sydney and then Adelaide. Were you starting to feel the weight of responsibility of having the band on the road with you, sort of being the captain in charge of the ship?
Kind of, yeah, but the captain goes down with the ship, doesn't he? So, we were very much in this together. These were communal decisions. I don't think anybody grumbled and said, "Oh, I'm getting nervous and I want to go or I want to leave or whatever." We're all professionals. We all do what we do, and we've been doing it all our lives. We were being very cautious and careful. And listening to all the advice given to us. So if the promoter was happy to go ahead with shows and the government were happy for people to come together to see the shows, no limitations on it. But it did limit. We got down, I think by the time we got to Adelaide, we were down to, I think it was less than 500 people could gather. Prior to that, it was 1,000 or whatever. And of course, by the time we finished the Adelaide show and flew to Perth, that had reduced to 100 or 10. I think it changed on the same day. So that was the one show that we didn't get to do. And then we had the problem of trying to get home. We had already had our first gig pulled was in Dubai, which we were meant to stop off at on the way home to break up the journey. And that had gone a couple of weeks beforehand. And so the day we were due to fly out of Perth, we heard that any visas issued for Dubai were null and void. And the band, we faced the prospect of spending 24 hours in the airport at Dubai to catch the connecting flight that we had booked to go back to the UK. And at that point, it got very serious, because the idea of being stuck, in isolation, away from home, many, many miles away from home, was a very strong possibility. So we were all very fortunate to get back and get to our families and shuttle down.
Yeah. So you got home. How did you spend the first couple of days?
Trying to get over the jet lag. It's always a bit of a horror coming back. One of my daughters she'd just gone off traveling. She'd gone off to do Central America for 4 months. She managed 2 weeks, and I had to get her back from Mexico City for the same reasons. So we were trying to gather the daughters and pull them all back and get them all safe. So the first couple of days, I suppose, I didn't go anywhere near the studio. There was so much stuff to do, trying to understand how this isolation thing was going to work, because even then it was very grey guidelines we were getting. They were changing constantly, what you could do, what you couldn't do, where you could go, where you couldn't go. So I came back and I was locked in the house for 2 weeks, because I'd come from abroad. I'd been travelling in a tin box in the sky with 500 other people. So I had to kind of isolate, not step outside. We're fortunate. I mean, I feel sorry for people living in cities where they're living in flats and they have no access to gardens or getting outside. Luckily, we've got a garden, I had a bit of space. We all have our own rooms in the house, so we can all isolate when we want to. But to isolate and still be part of the family was incredibly important to me.
Yeah. So now that you're home, have you got your head around revised plans for the rest of the year?
Yes, it's everything's empty, everything's open. I have 2 albums on the go. I'm doing a follow-up orchestrated album because once we started the orchestrated project 2 years ago, we made a list of all the songs that we thought would be interesting to give cinematic orchestral treatments to, and the list was longer than it was more songs than I thought I'd ever written, and because they all kind of lend themselves to that atmospheric cinematic thing. So we've started kind of working on that, although we're doing it in isolation. Ty is working in his studio over in Oxford. I'm working here. We may not even use a proper orchestra, using high quality samples and working the way Ty does. It's unbelievably authentic sounding. So I'll wait and see what it all comes out like. And also, I'm 75% the way through a new album I've been working on for the last year and a half. And this is a perfect opportunity for me to knuckle down and get it done. I can't say that I've got too many distractions. When you're not touring, you're not doing interviews. So I've got plenty of time on my hands to get this stuff done. So I've been playing with a few bits and pieces of, kind of software and whatever, working on guitar sounds, all of that. All of the things that you promise yourself that if you get the time, you will do it. Now I have no excuse.
So what's the first thing you're going to do when this is all over? What are you looking forward to most?
I think like most people going out somewhere, just go and have a meal somewhere where I'm not cooking it or they're not cleaning up after me or whatever. Um, I think the big thing for most people, and I'm sure it's the same there, that the moment Christmas and New Year's over, the television is full of adverts for vacations and holidays. And I think that people, the moment they see that there's possibly a gateway where it all opens up again, I think people will be looking to go away and book something at least that they can look forward to. Everyone needs something in the horizon, a pinpoint, a pinnacle that you work towards. That's your payback. And I think that's probably what people would be doing. But, for me, as I said, work continues. I'm here, I've got my toys, I've got my stuff. So unless the electricity goes off, I have absolutely no excuse not to finish the new album at least.
Okay, Mitch, it was great to chat, and we look forward to seeing you back here in less stressful circumstances next time.
It was an absolute joy, and it was a real pleasure for me to bring the band down and do things properly. Not an acoustic show, but a full-on plug-in, make a hell of a lot of racket show, and it was great.
Yeah.